Hello, this is Grant Swartzwelder, President of OTA Environmental Solutions, and welcome to another episode of Oilfield Strong Video uh, and podcasts. As you know, we are now on all forms of podcasts, so you can pick us up in a variety of places. I'm so excited about having our uh, this guest, Congressman August Pfluger. Congressman, when I looked at your bio, there were several things that really jumped out to me. One, I had no idea that you were the first Midland Odessa person to really represent uh, that area on in the Energy Committee. And that's just amazing that that hasn't been the case. And then throw in that you're with the Homeland Security Committee. That's really to me, seems like two of the most important ones. So that is fantastic. We have that representation. The second thing that I noticed was that you represent in your district 20 counties, which just seems amazing that one can do that, and the diversity from agriculture to energy. So I think you do a phenomenal job with that. But then probably the most important thing is I received a hat one time saying, I have two daughters, so I don't skier easily. And I see you have three daughters, so you definitely can't skier easily because you got three of them and I only have two of them. So should I say congratulations on that, or I feel
Yeah.
sorry for you on that, or yes to both? I don't know. You can, and being a good congressman, maybe you shouldn't respond to that at all, just to keep the family in harmony. But uh, but speaking of scary, the reason you're here is because you've been the leader, I think, in trying to protect the oil industry from a onslaught of regulatory um, efforts by the EPA and others, uh, specifically the non-attainment designation for the Permian Basin. I know you've had a variety of meetings with EPA and on. Can you fill us in on kind of where that all stands and maybe a little background so that some of the folks that aren't aware that this is something that is really live and really, really imminent, if not, if we don't do something?
Grant, thank you for having me. I'll briefly say that raising daughters is not scary, but the EPA and the Biden administration is very scary. And having three daughters keeps me on my toes and it keeps me very grounded. My wife does a great job with the 16, 13, and 9-year old while I'm in DC fighting against the unrealistic and completely just out of touch administration that we know. This is the latest in a salvo of weapons. We've seen it from the beginning, early 2021, when Biden came in. They started their all-out assault of the oil and gas industry. I'll tell you, my passion for the energy industry, yes, it's because I grew up in West Texas. Yes, I have family that has been involved in this business for decades. But really, my passion comes from the fact that I served in the military, that it's a national security issue, that I went around the world, that I was stationed in foreign countries, and I saw where bad policy left countries and rendered countries economically failed. It rendered them completely dependent on their adversaries for energy. And so when you think about what the administration is doing, they have a very methodical, a very persistent approach to breaking down the industry, or trying to. But what they don't take into account is good West Texas ingenuity. And guess what? They may be persistent, they may be creative, but we're more persistent, we're more creative, we're more innovative, and we've been doing it longer. And we will continue to do that. The latest is a threat of non-attainment. Just to let our viewers know what that means, is basically under the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, NAAQS, they used to have a standard that was 0.75 parts per million when it comes to some of the toxins that they're looking for in the air. And they've lowered that threshold, not surprisingly, to 0.70. In reality, what the Permian Basin has done in the last 13, 14 years by going from 1 million barrels a day to 6 million barrels a day, yet still at the same time, a fivefold, sixfold increase they've reduced. The producers and the innovation has actually reduced the harmful toxins that have been released into the atmosphere, including the methane intensity, by over 30%. The administration is trying to justify putting more constraints and shackles on this industry by putting the entirety of the Permian Basin, which is hundreds of thousands of square miles, into a status of non-attainment. Yet They don't have the science to back it up. They don't have the air monitors to actually tell them that data. The only air monitors that actually exist are in New Mexico. They don't have a single one in the state of Texas. And so we're fighting this tooth and nail. It's an ongoing battle. Last week, we had the director of the EPA in front of Congress. The week before, we had the Region 6 director, Dr. Earthia Nance, to Midland, Texas, and we showed her what we've been doing. We took her on a field trip. We had a roundtable that you participated in. We talked about all these issues, and I don't think they came away from that roundtable and from that visit convinced that there actually is a problem. They're actually trying to create a problem, and it's going to make it harder on our ability to provide affordable, reliable energy, which is the goal to energy dominance and ultimately energy independence.
Let's talk about the ramifications if they go forward with the non-attainment. Obviously, it adds a lot more regulatory requirements to the industry, but at that panel you discussed, I did not realize the effects that it would have on cities, on roads, on little towns. It has a very dire effect, not just on the industry. It's a regional issue.
You're right. You know, in that roundtable, we had Mayor Lori Blanc, we had State Representative Brooks Landgraf, we had State Senator Kevin Sparks, and each of those elected officials plus industry leaders spoke up. And it's not just the production, it's not just the transmission, it's not just the refining or the export of these fossil fuels or the feedstock. All of that is true. We know that it will raise the cost, it will impede progress on the affordability and the reliability of the energy sources. But what I thought was very interesting was when it came to construction cost, and especially Mayor Blanc and State Representative Landgraf and Senator Sparks spoke up about how harmful this will be for the construction costs. We're talking about roads and bridges and houses and the things that we need in West Texas that already have risen due to Biden's own inflation problems. But when you put a non-attainment stamp on this area, it will actually raise the cost of construction, which hurts every single person. And Grant, guess who it hurts the most? It hurts those that are struggling, new families with new kids, and those that are working paycheck to paycheck and are already fighting inflationary costs. And that's the most harmful thing. If you want to stop our economy dead in its tracks, stop the middle class, the lower middle class, those that are starting their families, that are getting into the workforce, make it harder for them to just afford the common things like a new home or purchasing groceries. That's what this stamp of non-attainment will actually do to our economy.
And I can see it really, that and the methane rule really having an effect on small towns that are so dependent on these little these wells, these smaller areas that are going to get really hurt by all this additional regulation. You made a mention about the air monitors, kind of thinking about how we got there. That this is based on monitors that aren't even in Texas, and there's 3 of them, I think, or maybe less. But then I also heard, and please correct me, that these are the same monitors that they use to make El Paso non-attainment. And so somehow the wind blows to El Paso sometimes, and then sometimes it blows to Midland. Am I wrong, or am I just confused about my whole geography, which could be?
You're absolutely right. And when you ask the head of the EPA, well, let's just start with Region 6, Dr. Nance. Well, I'm glad she came to Midland. I'm glad she went out and saw a tank
Definitely.
battery. I'm glad she saw what the industry has been doing already to reduce methane, to capture it, to make sure that we're not part of the problem. And the oil and gas industry has gotten a bad rap for a long time. But we're not getting credit for the things we're doing. When you have air monitors that are in New Mexico, and those are responsible for judging the air quality in El Paso, and also responsible for then judging the air quality in places like Glasscock County, which is over 100 miles away from where these are located. How can you look yourself in the eye as the EPA and claim that you are the scientific gold standard for air quality? And we know that that's false. Look, I've not had a single person come to Washington, D.C. in the industry and testify before Congress. I've not been in Midland. I've not been in Odessa or any other production area in the U.S. and hear anybody in the industry say that they don't want cleaner air. Everyone wants it, but you have to be realistic, and government can't be working against you. And what I told Director Regan last week, and it was a very heated exchange. I encourage everyone to go watch my questioning of him, because he is lying to the American public when he says that he is working with industry. If he was working with industry, if the EPA was actually working in good faith, we would have air monitors in places like the Permian Basin on the eastern side of the state line, at the well sites, at the tank batteries that are giving us credit for what we're doing. We don't trust them because you're right to say that there's three and none of them are located in the areas that they're trying to put us into non-attainment for.
And so that kind of brings up the point, and you kind of answered it. Why don't we have monitors over there? And if we're being clean, then we should show it. And I believe that TCEQ is required to have a certain number of monitors in the state, and we have those. But then I think it comes back to your point about there's this distrust of industry versus regulatory, probably for the right reason, that prevents us from wanting to do that. Is that the
That's
base
right.
problem?
It's distrust. It comes back to our form of governance, a federal governance, where you have a republic, and the states should have primacy, just like Class 6 wells. We've been fighting for that for years to get Texas to have the primacy and the jurisdiction over those types of wells. But there's a lack of trust between the state and federal level. There's a lack of trust between the industry and the federal level. We all want to do the right thing, but they're not allowing us to do it because they're burdensome, they're overreaching, and they're putting into place, and I know you're going to talk about methane regulations here, but they're putting into place regulatory laws. And this was a question to Reagan, do you write laws? And he said no. And we laughed as Republicans. We said, well, the fact that you don't think you're actually writing laws, yet somebody can go to jail, somebody can pay a fine, there's a criminal penalty if you don't abide by what the EPA is writing down. That's a joke, and that's leading to the mistrust. Let's work together. We're having a heck of a fight up there. It's over issues like non-attainment because we don't trust them, and TCEQ also, rightfully so, doesn't trust them. Just look at West Virginia versus the EPA. That is the gold standard for a case of distrust between what the federal government is doing. And by the way, some of the staff on the EPA, they know the ins and outs of the business. Most of the EPA has no idea where energy comes from. They have no idea what it takes to actually produce reliable energy. And when you look at the cleanliness of American energy, the 42 to 44 API light sweet crude that comes out of the Permian Basin, we should be celebrating that every single day as a form of very good, very well produced, very efficient, very clean energy, as opposed to what the Russian dirty gas energy actually is in other places around the world.
You mentioned Director Reagan. How many of the EPA folks do you think have actually been on a oil location? And it doesn't have to be Midland. I'll take Marcellus or whatever. How many of those folks that are regulating us, the industry, have been and actually seen an oil well, oil location, do you think?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question, but I would put a large sum of money wagered on the fact that it's only one, and it's Director Nance, who recently, just 2 weeks ago, came, which is really sad. I know Director Reagan has not. That's where the heated exchange really started. I said, why have you not come out? Well, he said, Congressman, I just sent my Region 6. I said, I know, but this is the most important energy production area in the entire world. Don't you think it's worth your time to come out? Will you commit to coming out before taking some sort of radical action like putting the Permian Basin into non-attainment? Will you commit to it? And he wouldn't do it. And so, unfortunately, Grant, I think the answer is almost zero of the appointed people, maybe some of the staff, but almost zero of the senior leadership within the EPA has ever taken the time to understand what America has done and what our energy story is over the last 100 years.
And I think you said it. I thought that was really very strong of Dr. Nance and her team. She brought 3, 4 other folks to come and look, and I think it really helped her to see what was going on and talk to the representatives. But you had small producers there, and she could really get a feel for more than just these large companies doing bad things. It got a much better picture. So I was very proud that you were able to get her to come out, and that she very willingly came out. So good for both of y'all there. The other thing that I wanted to visit, and then we'll move to methane rule, is how in the discussion of how we got there, this whole idea of a sliding scale of regulation and hurdles. From what I see, it seems like we keep every time we improve, the numbers or the requirements go down, and so it's a kind of a little uh, circling effect that we never are able to catch up. And then when you throw in, when you talk about the for the non-attainment, there's a base level of pollutants out there. Dust, I think anyone in West Texas knows there's a lot of dust and other things out there that really make the margin of error very small.
You're right. I mean, this is the point of distrust because there's going to be, some sort of level of atmospheric interference, whether it's dust, wildfires, obviously, it can be attributed to some of that. There's many things. I mean, we as a country still need to manufacture. We obviously want to do that better and more clean, and in a way that allows our families to live in a clean air environment and drink clean water. I think we've done that. I think the Permian Basin actually is a gold standard for that, and has done a really nice job. But this is why we don't believe what the EPA is saying, because they're not actually taking this into account. And it's just the typical Charlie Brown example where they keep moving the goalpost. The football keeps being pulled out. You can name any other example or analogy. But the reason that we're so upset in Congress is this. We have not written these laws this way. We have written laws that have said we want the EPA to reasonably enforce the standards of congressional intent. And they've gone well beyond that. And that's the biggest fight that we have. It's the Article 1 fight that people like me are championing, because we're the ones that come back, Grant. We talk to you, we talk to other ranchers, we talk to industrial folks, we talk to even environmentalists, and we say, what's the goal? Is the goal to have clean air and clean water? If that's the case, okay, then let's look at that as the target and let's come up with a reasonable solution. So far, the EPA in the Biden administration has been anything but reasonable, and we are going to continue to fight them tooth and nail to regain congressional power, congressional authority, to use the power of the purse, and to hold them accountable, which has not happened. They've been running wild. And by the way, they're pandering to people like the Wild Earth Guardians and other environmental radical groups that just continue to levy lawsuit after lawsuit on the industry without really looking at the impact, which is, you want to put Americans in danger, then pull affordable, reliable power out from under them. That puts Americans in danger more than anything else.
And I look at this from a distance, and maybe I'm being naive, but if you really want to have an impact, then improve your takeaway. Allow pipe to take that gas away. Work on electrification in the grid system that allows you to replace old diesel equipment with, and that would have much more of a material effect than and not as punitive.
You're absolutely right. The permitting, luckily in Texas, the Railroad Commission, under leadership like Christy Craddock, does a great job, and we're able to put takeaway capacity, even despite challenges. I mean, I know we have challenges, but think about, in the Northeast, I mean, there's no pipelines that have been built. And if you really want to increase and improve air quality, then you would use pipelines, you would use takeaway capacity, and we would be exporting LNG, which is a huge issue. And it's something that I've been championing for several years and will continue to do so.
Right. Well, let's switch over to another fun topic, the methane fee, methane waste emission charge. And I know you, Senator Cruz, others have really been pushing hard on that. Again, we talked about this on the panel that you put together with Dr. Nance about the effects that that's going to have on the small producers and the unintended consequences that they're not aware of. Orphan wells, the ecosystems of so many of these small towns really being affected. And quite honestly, I don't think anyone really knows what's about to hit them.
No, they don't. And because we have a little bit longer format, let me just explain in greater detail than I normally would what's going on. Most companies have been reporting on the Subpart W reporting for years, for decades. Okay, so we still have that. Last year, with the so-called, which I don't agree with, IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, under Democrat Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer leadership, what they did was they took the waste emissions charge and they said, if you don't get to a certain level of methane emissions, if you don't decrease it to a certain level, which, by the way, the Permian Basin has been doing for over 14, 15 years, we've been doing this, then we're going to charge you $900, $1,200, and $1,500 for a certain amount of emissions over the next 3 years. That reporting basically starts this year, from January of this year all the way to the end, and the taxation will begin next year. In addition to the waste emissions charge, what Congress passed as legislation that I voted against, but what Congress passed, then what the EPA has done, and this is kind of the third part of it, is they set out new guidance, new regulatory guidance in the form of Quad O, B, and C. And you have existing source pollution, you have new source pollution. When they mixed all these things together, they mixed the Subpart W that's been around, they mixed the waste emissions charge, which Congress passed, and then they put their own spin on it. Well, these three things under the new Quad O, B, and C rules are contradictory in nature. That they talk about methane, they talk about the emissions of methane, but what they don't do is explain who and what actually qualifies and is going to be subjected to the taxes. And they make it very, very difficult. So this is what I asked Director Regan on the stand this week. I said, Director Regan, did you specifically review and approve the Subpart W guidance? Well, of course, Congressman, I'm part of the EPA. Okay, that's fine. Do you know how many pages Subpart W actually is? And boy, he was offended. You really got to go look at this. I mean, he was extremely defensive. Congressman, I can't see how the number of pages has anything to do with clean air. And I said, this is the problem. Director Regan, it's 2,685 pages. It's very complex. It's very complicated. Producers don't know who is subject to this. In part of the guidance, you have people that are above 25,000 metric tons. And in new parts of the guidance, Quad O, B, and C, you have people that might have one orphan well that produces 1 barrel a day, and they're going to be subjected to it. And he just can't wrap his head around what a slam in the face of our producers this is. And so I know this is a long story, Grant, but the point is this: Congress is thinking one thing, and yet the EPA is going above, and they're overreaching, and they're doing it in a burdensome way. And we are going to hold them accountable. It may not happen this month. It may not happen next month. It may not happen this year or next year, but we are not going to stop until we reel them back in and get them to a point where they are reasonable. The Chevron deference case is going to be a big marker for making sure that they are reasonable. We are fighting against them, not because we want methane in the atmosphere. Actually, it's quite opposite. We want them, the EPA and the government, to acknowledge what we've been doing to reduce methane intensity. And nowhere is that more prevalent than in the Permian Basin, where we've done so by the factor of over 30% in the last 10 plus years.
So how can that be either improved, corrected, rescinded? Is that a legal challenge? Is that a administrative? Is it a change of administration? What has to happen? Because right now it seems like, and I appreciate all that you do, but it seems like you're just hitting your head against the wall to make that happen because they've got the administrative capabilities.
You're right. We are hitting our head against the wall, but yes, it's a legal challenge. Yes, it's an administration challenge. Yes, it's a legislative challenge. It's all of the above.
Well, okay.
And we're doing all of the above. You know, when it comes to what I'm specifically doing legislatively, we've written many congressional review acts to repeal the Biden administration's Quad O, B, and C rules. I have legislation that would fully repeal the methane, what I call the natural gas tax. We are looking, and I am working with the incoming, hopefully, Trump administration to make sure that we have an energy security strategy, that we look at this for what it is. We're working with industry, and this is the lie that the EPA is telling you. Well, we've been working with industry. No, you have not. Everyone in the EPA has said that. Yet when they send me the names of the companies they've been working with, it's 4 or 5 companies. In fact, the last list we got was 8 companies. Grant, do you know how many of those were small independent companies in the Permian Basin? 0. They haven't worked with any trade associations like IPAA, like PBPA. They have not worked with AXPC. They haven't worked with our small companies. So yes, even though it does seem like we're banging our head against the wall, we are making progress. we're punching holes into the fallacy that they're actually doing something good, because they're really not. We want to lower emissions, and we want to produce affordable, reliable, high quality energy that we can use for domestic purposes and export. And we're going to continue doing that. And I think Democrats are actually joining us. They've voted on my legislation multiple times in the last couple of months because they see what we're doing is true.
It's amazing if you base it on facts and actual data. That's probably a good starting point. And so much of what I see the EPA is doing with methane tax and others, it's based on academia and kind of projections or modeling. And I know you brought that up, or someone brought that up with the panel with Dr. Nance, and I don't know if she accepted that, but it seems like the base data and the base analysis has some holes to it.
I think she was shocked, don't you, to learn that there were actual monitors that companies used, methane monitors, companies like ChampionX and others that are doing this, to actually see that there are monitors at these well sites and at the tank batteries and all throughout, that we're actually monitoring methane when it comes to pipelines. She was shocked to know, oh, you actually are looking at that? Well, yes, we are. That's how we've reduced it, because it's not just modeling, it's actual data from actual emissions. And the companies go back and do the right thing, not because the government is telling them to, but because that's the right thing to do. And it's actually economical to them.
It's good business, definitely. Congressman Pfluger, always appreciate you coming on, and appreciate what you're doing for the industry and for Midland and Odessa and the greater areas, and just educating folks of what the issues are. I think is so important. So therefore, I really appreciate your time. Have a great day, sir.
Grant, thank you for having me. I'd like to say thank you to you and to all those who work in this industry. What you do is so important. It's a national security issue. You don't have a bigger fan than me. And I've made it my mission to go to Washington, D.C. and to educate every single one of my colleagues on what the Permian Basin does every single day, because it's an important story when it comes to our security. And we're going to keep fighting for that. Thanks for having me.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.